Good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And this morning, kind of a special show to recollect and put together some of the research that we've done over the past few years onto McDuff and his role, not this time in World War II and not in the FBI chasing spies and not as a counterintelligence agent for Hoover, but in fact as the counterinsurgency planner for Saxa. And that role stretches between two very famous operations. The first one being Operation White Star in Laos, which was completely secret at the time, and we're still just learning about it. This is an operation that began in 1958, before my dad was transferred from the FBI to the Pentagon in early 62. However, it went on into the 60s, and it was during the early 60s, 1962, of course, my dad was requested specifically by the Joint Chiefs to join their effort at taking special operations back from the CIA following the debacle of the Bay of Pigs, where President Kennedy decided to enforce what he believed, and that is that only the military was competent to carry out special operations of any size whatsoever, and that the effort of the CIA to do similar operations was wrong, foolish, and was going to be stopped. So, in military terms, the president created what was called Operation Switchback. And Operation Switchback, and you can read about that in a number of books, was the intentional transfer of authority over the Vietnam, Laos, and all the other special ops in the world of any size whatsoever to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who would operate them under their direct command. And in order to exert that direct command and to avoid the CIA, which was, of course, the real reason why McDuff was hired to Saxa, was to defeat the CIA. I called my channel to smash the CIA, and perhaps smash is too hard, but the idea is that the CIA should not be empowered to conduct operations overseas that are really military operations. Now, the interesting thing is that the military didn't really want to do special operations. The real military was people like Curtis LeMay, who would say, let's just bomb them into the Stone Age. Problem solved. But of course, that would have destroyed the assets that secretly they're trying to preserve in the effort to pursue other goals. They were actually protecting the heroin trade running from the Golden Triangle to Bangkok, to Saigon, and to Taiwan, where the heroin would be shipped all over the world, including the United States, through, you've heard about it, the stuffing of American bodies, the soldiers that died in the cause of freeing the people of South Vietnam had bags of heroin stuffed inside their body cavities after they were dead. And this was a secret way to ship heroin into the United States. And that's been exposed, but, these things, they come and they're like a blip in somebody's mind, and then they're gone again. And this whole example, processed in Hong Kong into heroin, thanks, Frogville. And but this whole story of Saxa and the whole story of my dad's career is fading. They're trying to cover it up and I've mentioned this a couple times before, but there have been a number of break-ins to my house over the years, and the things missing were not valuable things. They were memorabilia. They were things like my dad's Shanghai box, the box that he got when he was there in late 45 or early 46. I'm starting to look at Andy's South China Morning Post here. Heroin-filled coffins. Okay. Well, that's the story. Where was I? Anyway, let me get back in where I wanted to go. In this book that we showcased a little bit last night in the trio show called Terror in Vietnam by Jay Mallon, I pulled it off the shelf because of the comment about what the relationship was between the Vietnam War and Pentagon and the Special Forces. I actually don't remember exactly what the context was, but I wanted to show everybody this, get it in focus the best I can. Okay, I can read it. Can you read it up at the top on the right above Terror in Vietnam? There's some ink. And the first thing it says is to Barney Cochran, with warm regards, Jay Mallon. So let's start there. Jay Mallon, a writer for Soldier of Fortune magazine, as well as for Time Life generally. And Barney Cochran, well, who was he? Well, Barney Cochran, his first name is Drexel, so it's not too hard to find references to Drexel B. Cochran, such as exist. There are very few, but when you put in Drexel and Cochran in Vietnam or Laos, you do get some hits. So that's where I've been since we had our discussion last night. There was an indication that General Donald Blackburn might have been involved in James Files's account of the JFK assassination, and I found that to be rather shocking and just not consistent with my own studies, my own understanding. So I felt like I needed to go and study General Blackburn again, and that's what I did last night and this morning. So General Donald D. Dunwoody Blackburn was a special forces officer. He was a special forces officer, mainly due to his experience in the Philippines in World War II, when he was a stay-behind officer after the Bataan Death March and the surrender of MacArthur's troops. When MacArthur really got defeated very badly in the first attack on the Philippines by the Japanese. So Blackburn is a stay-behind warrior and organized a group called Blackburn's Headhunters, which actually became a guerrilla military unit that by the time of the Leyte Gulf invasion numbered 20,000 guerrillas fighting under the command of General Blackburn. He was a colonel at the time, I think. Anyway, the Blackburn, of course, was a special forces officer. And let's see, I think Andy's going through it here. So 57, he's with MAAG Vietnam, right? So that as commander, hold on, Andy, as commander of the 77th Special Forces Group, Blackburn spearheaded Operation Hotfoot and its follow-on Operation White Star in Laos. Okay, so this is the real Donald Blackburn that I've been studying, is the general who commands Special Forces units. And obviously, with the Philippines, he was able to command people perhaps that didn't speak English, that were of different tribes within the Philippines. If tribes is the right word, I don't know. Apologize if I'm wrong, but certainly his ability to work with indigenous people, indigenous groups, was part of why he would have been selected. In two respects, his service strongly coincides with my father's. And the first one is with regard to, I'm going to show you some graphics here, and I'm sorry, let me make sure I get this right. Share screen, Chrome tab. Let's see. Okay, so the first document I wanted to share with you this morning is this history of the Royal Lao Air Force Ravens, the North American T-28s by Dr. Joe F. Leaker, published in 2013 and 2015. And you see there the what's called a roundel, the round symbol of the Royal Lao Air Force. And under that, a little bit of history, which I will read to you. In August 1963, the U.S. government gave the Royal Government of Laos six T-28s, apparently, and provided a U.S. Air Force mobile training team for initial instruction and maintenance at Wat. In a message from the U.S. State Department to Ambassador Unger, dated 26 October 63, the U.S. allowed the T-28s to be used in an attempt to intercept and down any North Vietnamese illegal supply flights, but did not allow the T-28s to drop bombs for cratering Route 7, because that would have been a violation of the Geneva Agreements. So much of this is about the U.S. trying to maintain plausible deniability, right? Two versions of the T-28 were sent to Laos, the reconnaissance RT-28 and the attack T-28D. But as there were not enough pilots, on the 6th of December 1963, SINCPAC recommended a detachment of the 1st Air Commando Wing, Eglin Air Force Base. Remember, Eglin Air Force Base is the place where they staged the Sante raid, to be deployed to Udorn to help the Royal Lao Air Force. On the 13th of March, 1964, 38 U.S. Air Force officers and airmen of Detachment 6, 1st Air Commando Wing, codenamed Water Pump, commanded by Major Drexel B. Cochran, departed Hurlburt, arriving in Saigon in mid-March. Half of them assembled 4 crated T-28s. The other flew to Udorn, where the detachment established a T-28 maintenance facility using Air America equipment, and immediately began a T-28 ground and flight school for Thai and Lao pilots. By mid-May 1964, additional T-28s arrived from South Vietnam, former MAC-V aircraft which had been phased out. Now there were more than a dozen graduates flew daily bombing and reconnaissance missions over Laos. The American flyers, mostly Air America pilots, were called the A team, the Thai flyers were the B team, and the Lao were the C team. Okay. Now in that paragraph, we have established that Barney Cochran was the initial leader of Air Commando Wing, the 1st Air Commando Wing, Detachment 6, which was codenamed Water Pump. And that is the T-28s that become the Royal Lao Air Force, okay? Now, who do they work for? Well, they work for Vang Pao, Vangpao, general, who was basically a soldier that the CIA picked and decided he could be a good general if he did what he was told. And so, as long as he kept quiet and did what he was told, he was able to be allowed to be the general. But his real talent in life was the production and selling of opium. So that is the background of how Barney Cochran, who gave this book, loaned this book to my dad, McDuff, in maybe 64, 65, sometime right about 65, I think. And obviously, he was in on the Air America business. And he was obviously a very close Vang Pao supporter. And I don't mean to speak ill of the dead. I imagine he's passed by now. I haven't been able to find a trace of him much, but I think he's gone. But and this is the past. We're just talking about history now. We're not talking about making judgments, as so many people want to make judgments. But this is what happened. Without making any judgments, we can see what happened, that the Air America pilots were seconded to these T-28s to try to bomb Route 7 to interdict the supplies coming from North Vietnam through Laos into the South. That was the military mission. They couldn't do it because of the Geneva Accords, so they created a Royal Lao Air Force. And you can read terrible stories about how the Hmong people, HMONG, or Montagnards, as they're also called, were just these ignorant people. I mean, ignorant in Western ways, intelligent, I'm sure, in their own ways, and the traditional and ways of their homeland. But from Western point of view, they couldn't read. They didn't speak our language. They had no experience with machinery whatsoever. And now we're calling on them to operate highly sophisticated machinery, flying in the air on military missions. And they're going to meet very bad ends, but they did it anyway. This was all part of the job for special forces back then. Let's see. Here, I just wanted to show you a Special Forces Star Sapphire ring labeled, and I just found this on Google Images. Most of the Special Forces rings say Special Forces on them or have that Special Forces emblem on them, but this is before that. This is earlier, where they use these. It looks like it's just a blank gold. He has two additional sapphires on the side. But here's that ring. If I can, let's see, how do I get back on the screen here? Andy, can you put me back up on the screen? Where is it? Oh, here I am. Okay, I did it. Don't worry, Andy, I got it. So here is, trying to get it in the field of view there. Okay, now you can see there's my dad's ring. And the story behind this ring is he said that a couple guys gave him this ring to his father, my grandpa, Tom Sr. And he said that a couple guys gave me this ring, but when I went to work, they told me I couldn't wear it. They told him he couldn't wear this ring that these guys gave him. Obviously, a very personal memento, a acknowledgement of something he did good, something he did right. And, by the way, we mentioned Operation White Star last night, and question was, where does the idea of white star come from? Well, this is a star sapphire. And the star that you see, if you catch it right in the sun, is actually a white star in the blue field there. And I wonder if that was where they came up with the idea. However, I have also read in a source this morning where I can't remember which it was, but it makes sense to me that White Star was actually the code name for Vang Pao, the military leader and heroin business organizer in Laos. He basically took over the whole country's opium business. So at this point, we have introduced the connection between my dad, Barney Cochran, and the Operation White Star, part of which was Operation Water Pump, and Barney Cochran, the commander of that particular Air Force operation, he being an Air Force officer. I think he was a major at the time. I think he retired as a colonel. Well, that is the story I wanted to tell you about. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of logistics I want to straighten out here. Okay, now let's go and talk for a minute about this article on Citizendium, the Citizens Compendium. And this article puts together Fletcher Prouty's reporting and other information into a short paragraph or two that I think is very instructive about what was SACSA, what was the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. So I want to read this, and here we go. The Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, SACSA, to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, JCS, who was the Washington-based officer, usually a brigadier general, who coordinated covert action and some intelligence collection in Washington, D.C. for the Department of Defense, with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Office of Secretary of Defense, Central Intelligence Agency, and White House. The office existed from the early 1960s to sometime in the 1970s. Comment: sometime in the 1970s? What are you talking about? Was it ever disbanded? Where did it go? Where's the records? Where's the files? Where's the personnel? Who was in it? All still blank. We don't know. When did it end? Well, my dad died in 71. I know it went on for at least another year, but I haven't found anything to indicate to me that it was ever ended officially. That's just my first comment about this Okay, incumbents included General Craig, who I don't really know anything about, another interim special forces officer. Prouty does name these guys, but I didn't study them because they were deemed by him to be of short duration and ineffective. And then in comes Victor Krulak in 1961. And it was at a party for Krulak that the pictures were taken with my dad, my mother, and General Krulak. And that must have been in 62 or 63. Brigadier General Roland Henry Buck Anthus, Major General William Dupuy, and he's the guy that ran the hump operations from Burma. So he was very, very well integrated into the OSS Detachment 101, it was called, and all of that opium dealing back then. And then finally, Brigadier General Donald Blackburn. And Donald Blackburn is where we started the show today. Here's the lineage. It grew out of an earlier function in OSD, the Office of Special Operations. Of course, that was Fletcher Prouty's job. He was in charge of that. OSO, to a certain extent, was an organization formed around the personality, skills, and relationships of General Erskine. OSO was responsible for, among other things, supervision of Department of Defense intelligence agencies, supervising the National Security Agency. That I never knew. Military support to the CIA, support of the clandestine operations of the individual military services. While it had a coordinating role in the last case, it was not supervisory. The individual services still prepared and justified their budgets. Other functions have been in OSO, but had moved to other organizations in the Office of Secretary of Defense, including ARPA, which became DARPA, okay? And the State Department relations for military operations, which was called OSD-ISA, the coordination between the Office of Secretary of Defense and the CIA through the State Department. Prouty indicated that strategic deception, which in World War II was the assignment of Joint Security Control working with the UK London Controlling Section, was, quote, next door to SACSA. Okay, and we've covered this, but I want to read it. After the Bay of Pigs operation, General Maxwell Taylor was directed by President Kennedy to do an after-action analysis. The analysis group, containing Taylor, DCI Dulles, and former Chief of Naval Operations Arleigh Burke, and Attorney General Robert Kennedy, became Kennedy Administration National Security Action Memorandum 55. Along with two supplementary NSAMs, 56 and 57. Prouty described it as the president saying to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, "You are my advisor for clandestine operations and all other operations being carried out in peacetime." This did not appeal to then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lyman Lemnitzer, a conventional officer. Prouty also indicated that Taylor, while CJCS did not like the idea of being a presidential advisor, but more an operator, as had been Allen Dulles. While Major General Edward Lansdale had been involved with the counterinsurgency in the Philippines and then in Vietnam from 54 on, he suddenly dropped from the decision process in the early Kennedy administration. Another reason for creating SACSA was, according to Hook, H-U-C-K, to cut Lansdale, an Air Force general, but seen in the military as part of CIA, out of the military special operations process. Well, that is Kennedy smashing the CIA. That is why my dad was recruited to SACSA to be the counterinsurgency planner. And that is the position he was in when General Blackburn came up with the idea based on intelligence gathered at Fort Belvoir by Air Force photography experts, that it was possible to rescue the prisoners at Sante. And so when he puts together his team, he puts together the same team that he had in Laos under White Star, including Colonel Bull Simons, who was the leader of unknown, and just countless special ops. And the famous Richard Meadows, who is probably the most famous special operations warrior in the whole Vietnam era, if not the whole second half of the 20th century. Well, they put together the best of the best of the best for the Sante raid, but they didn't include Ed Lansdale. Ed Lansdale was the guy that used the British training that he was given to divide and conquer, to create internal disputes that he could escalate into civil war, which is what he did with the Hooks in the Philippines in order to get Magsaysay. into the presidency of the Philippines, a person that he could control. And the CIA was very happy with Ramon Magsaysay as opposed to a democratically selected or even elected leadership for the Philippines. Another example of the CIA installing dictators instead of supporting President Kennedy's plan, which would be to mentor and encourage the development of productive industry, advancing the civilization and culture of the former colonial areas, including Vietnam. You know, you have to think that if Kennedy had lived, he and Ho Chi Minh might have actually gotten along. I know it's an extraordinary thing to say, but think about 4 years later, 5 years later, instead of being involved in this pseudo war against communism, which is really a war to support the CIA's schemes through, through the heroin trade. What if they had decided to work together to try to make a modern and a peaceful and a profitable relationship with Vietnam? Who knows? Well, Vietnam War era. During the Vietnam War, in addition to its Washington role, it took requests from and passing direction to the United States Pacific Command, the United States Army Special Forces, the Fort Bragg, in other words, various organizations that were to become Air Force Special Operations Command at Hurlbut Field, Florida, and Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, that's MACV. It was the controlling office for Operation Ivory Coast, that is the Sante raid, the attempted POW rescue at Sante. Blackburn was transferred to a career-ending post after its failure. Well, there you go. Lansdale shunted aside, he being a CIA guy. You know, he wore Air Force epaulets, uniform, but the military saw him as CIA. And so you can see that people that were military types, like Blackburn, in my position, my estimation, like Simons, like the guys that, wanted to risk their lives to save their fellow soldiers, saw and knew what CIA operation meant. And it just means deception and killing and terrorism. This is the irony of this book's title. Is called Terror in Vietnam. But where does the terror really start? Well, we've read enough about it to know that the U.S. was involved in that through the Phoenix program and the predecessors of the Phoenix program. So we have people like Ed Lansdale who are willing to, cut off people's heads in order to scare the village. And that kind of people, President Kennedy did not want to be involved in our military, in our secret ops. He just didn't want them at all. He wanted to support the indigenous peoples around the world so that they could have their own economies and grow into prosperous, if not at least no longer caveman lifestyle poverty, which, may be quite an exaggeration in and of itself. But that, when a Patrice Lumumba or someone around the world asked for help, that he would have provided it, whereas the CIA provides the opposite of assassination. Okay, so this is a big deal to me, to see the difference between the CIA and Edward Lansdale and the President Kennedy's attempt at Operation Switchback to revert, as he said, the authority for these really military operations to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I am now going to the Air Commando Journal of looking for a date on this. It's not October 2020, so just this past October. Okay. And it's the 50th anniversary of the Sante raid on November 21st, 1970. So now I think for the rest of the show, I'm going to see what I can cover out of this article called Recollections of the Sante Raiders. Almost 50 years ago, a joint special operation task force conducted a raid into North Vietnam to rescue American prisoners of war who were believed to be incarcerated in a camp at San Tay. The raiders executed a meticulously planned mission in the early morning hours of 20 November 1970 and were shocked to find the camp abandoned. It was a devastating experience for all, filled with anger, guilt, and apprehension for the well-being of the prisoners. Their remorse persisted until they learned about the positive impact their raid had had on the treatment of the POWs. Isn't it characteristic of the CIA to put some positive face on something that really wasn't at all successful? My studies indicate to me that Henry Kissinger knew that the prisoners had been moved, that he knew it was not going to succeed, and that he really just wanted the military to have to go through the motions of General Blackburn's idea. His idea was we could save these guys. And so Kissinger says, okay, go ahead, But they planned it for October 20th, not November 20th. And Kissinger put his thumb down on that plan and said, no, you have to wait another month. And that other month, of course, gave them plenty of time to make sure that none of our prisoners got rescued. And if you can't imagine Henry Kissinger stopping the rescue of American flyers held under primitive conditions in a hellhole in North Vietnam, then you don't know Henry Kissinger. So all of these gung-ho warriors went to war, and it's the biggest event of their lives. I've never met any of them. I understand that they do have an association, and I'm just, for some reason, haven't been going there. But anyway, let's read some more. In early summer 1970, Brigadier General Donald D. Blackburn, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Thomas H. Moorer, proposed a joint feasibility study to study a possible rescue of American POWs from North Vietnam. After the Joint Chiefs were briefed on the results of this study, a mission planning group from all services assembled in July 1970. This joint planning group expanded and developed the most daring POW rescue mission, codenamed Ivory Coast. When the Joint Chiefs of Staff received the Ivory Coast briefing, they endorsed it with great enthusiasm and decided to execute it under their own authority. Consequently, this rescue became the first joint military operation in U.S. history conducted under direct control of the CJCS, the Chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that being Admiral Moorer. Now, let me take a second to say, who signed my father's certificate or his medal and his award for meritorious civilian service, which we were told was the highest civilian award that can be given by the Pentagon. And maybe there's a little controversy about that now, again, involving Henry Kissinger, but that's what we were told. That was the highest. And it was signed by Admiral Thomas H. Moorer, this guy. Okay. He signed it. And so did the Secretary of Defense, Melvin Laird. So obviously my dad knew all these guys. After When the Joint Chiefs received the Ivory Coast briefing, they endorsed it with great enthusiasm. Consequently, this rescue became the first joint military operation in U.S. history conducted under the direct control of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They established a special Joint Contingency Task Force, or JCTF, to train for this mission in the U.S. without involving any of the commands that were conducting the war in Vietnam. The Joint Chiefs of Staff designated Air Force Brigadier General Leroy J. Manor as its commander. And of course, he became the SACSA after Blackburn. And he was the SACSA at the time of my dad's death and wrote that letter that I've shown you to my mother and my grandmother. As commander, and Army Colonel Arthur D. Bull Simons as his deputy. The first job was to staff their task force with the most experienced and best qualified volunteers. Colonel Simons' task was relatively easy. First, he selected Colonel Elliot P. Snyder as his ground force commander and Captain Richard J. Meadows as the Blue Boy Assault Group commander. Both of them came from the Ranger Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. The rest of his recruits came from the Special Forces at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Simons posted notices on bulletin boards throughout the Special Forces areas, inviting men to volunteer for a, quote, moderately hazardous mission. Almost 500 responded to the first call. Fewer showed up for the follow-up interviews that reduced the number of selectees to 82 enlisted and 15 officers. Brigadier General Manor had a more challenging task. As the commander of the Air Force Special Ops Forces, he provided the training facility at Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. However, his required and ready available fighter, helicopter, and transport air crews were spread out, not only through the U.S., but also in Southeast Asia and Germany. He could not duplicate the personnel selection process of Colonel Simons with everyone. Nevertheless, the U.S. Air Force volunteers, once assembled, were the best and the most experienced crews he could have found. The small number of planners who were briefed on the rescue mission after their arrival at Eglin Air Force Base were stunned by the boldness of the proposal. They realized that their mission could become the most important event of their military careers. Planning and training for this unprecedented joint service operation went on simultaneously with many new approaches to getting to the camp without detection, freeing the prisoners, and then bringing them home safely. So, as we're approaching the end of the hour, I'm not going to be reading this whole article, but I do recommend that you read it. It's October 2020 Air Commando Journal of 2020, and it includes a lot of details that I didn't have firmly in my mind when just from reading The Raid by Benjamin Schemmer. However, The Raid by Benjamin Schemmer remains my primary source for my opinion, which I hold very strongly, which is that all of this planning was done under my father's supervision, even though his name doesn't appear. And for whatever reason, they didn't include his name in the list of planners. That doesn't mean that he wasn't the top person on the planning staff at SACSA. And as that top person, he would have been involved in the details, making sure that whatever happened was planned meticulously as he planned everything else. So his planning did not result in defeating, the schemes behind the schemes whereby this raid was not successful. And nevertheless, they demonstrated such amazing abilities to coordinate, the services, to coordinate the flying of a helicopter and a jet and a prop plane to get all at the same place at the same time. That takes some thinking. and to navigate the planes through the mountains and not, to hide from the radar, all of that stuff, very detailed planning. But let's get back to this Special Forces ring here, because this whole thing was run by Army Special Forces guys. And I think maybe the saving grace of this, of the Sante raid, from my point of view, is that those officers and enlisted personnel that participated in that raid all lived. Not a single one of them was killed. Wow, they killed, I think, in excess of 50 North Vietnamese camp guards. They achieved complete surprise, total domination of firepower, and their timing, everything was perfect. It went exactly as according to plan. And the main thing I think that we can learn is that whoever planned this raid would have gotten a lot of respect from the people that participated in it. And maybe, just maybe, that's why I'm holding this ring here in my hand today. So there you go. A brief account of McDuff's war in Southeast Asia, from Operation White Star to Operations Ivory Coast, the raid on Sante. Be sure and join us tonight at 8 p.m. with Mike Billington for an account of his amazing life, his imprisonment, his accomplishments while in prison on a Robert Swan Mueller III trumped up charge, a man who's became an expert on China and many other areas of our foreign policy, which I look forward to learning about him and from him tonight at 8 p.m. here on McDuff Lives. So thanks again for being with me, and we'll see you soon. Stay tuned at noon for the Biden's Belt and Road Show with George Webb.